The sky above the research vessel Curiosity burned with stars as Lieutenant Commander Hajun stared at the holographic display, his face illuminated by its blue glow. The bridge crew sat in stunned silence. What had begun as a routine mapping mission at the edge of known space had turned into something none of them had prepared for. "Play it again," Hajun said quietly, his fingers gripping the edge of the command chair. The surveillance footage flickered before them once more. The Nelvari, tall, slender beings with silvery skin that seemed to ripple like water, were being herded into transport ships. They moved with heads bowed, connected by energy restraints that burned their skin when they resisted. Karad overseers, massive and armored, struck any who faltered. "We've been watching for 3 days," said Officer Sunmi, her voice tight. "It's the same on every settlement. They're taking everyone, children too." Hajun nodded grimly. The Karad Dominion had been expanding for years, but Earth and its colonies had maintained a careful distance. The non-interference treaty had kept an uneasy peace. Humans knew what the Karad were capable of. Their ships and weapons outmatched anything Earth could produce. "Incoming transmission from Patrol Ship 7, announced the communications officer. They found something else. The new footage made Hajun's blood run cold. A group of Nelvari had apparently tried to escape. Now they knelt in the dust of their world, surrounded by Karad soldiers. The execution was methodical, efficient. "Turn it off," Hajun ordered, rising from his chair to pace the small bridge. "Where's the nearest Karad patrol?" 3 hours. "At standard drive, sir." Hajun stared out the view screen at the planet below. Blue oceans, green land masses, not unlike Earth. A world being emptied of its people while the galaxy watched. "Sir, we have orders to observe and report only," reminded his second-in-command, Taiwan. High Command was very clear. "I know what our orders are," Hajun cut in. He'd served Earth Space Command for 15 years, had followed every rule, respected every line drawn on star charts dividing their space from ours. But watching that footage, something had shifted inside him. The ship's sensors chimed. "Sir, we're picking up a small vessel leaving the planet's atmosphere. Nelvari design, heavily damaged. Karad interceptors are moving to engage." Hajun didn't hesitate. "Move to intercept, shields up." The bridge erupted in protests. "Commander, that would violate at least 7 protocols. If that ship enters our sensor range, the Karad will consider it an act of..." "Enough!" Hajun's voice cut through the chaos. "I'm not asking anyone to follow me into this. Log your objections officially." He looked at each of them. "But I will not watch another execution when we can stop it." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, Sunmi turned to her console. "Plotting intercept course," she said quietly. "The Curiosity was never designed for combat. A research vessel with minimal defensive capabilities, it stood no chance against Karad warships. But it was faster, more maneuverable." As they approached the fleeing Nelvari ship, Hajun could see the damage. One engine gone, hull breaches, sealed with emergency patches. "Open a channel," he ordered. The view screen flickered, revealing the interior of the Nelvari craft. Dozens of them crowded the small ship, their luminescent eyes wide with fear. One stepped forward, hands raised in what seemed a universal gesture of peace. "We mean no harm." The translator interpreted their musical language. "Please, let us pass." "We're here to help," Hajun said. "Your ship is badly damaged. We can bring you aboard ours." The Nelvari looked bewildered. "You would risk Karad anger? For strangers?" Before Hajun could answer, Taiwan called out. "Karad interceptors changing course. They've spotted us. 2 minutes until weapon range." "Decide now," Hajun told the Nelvari. "We can take you somewhere safe, but we need to leave immediately." The Nelvari conferred briefly, their silvery skin flashing with what might have been emotion. "We accept your help," they finally said. As the Curiosity extended its docking tunnel, Hajun felt the weight of his decision. He'd just thrown away decades of careful diplomacy. The Karad would see this as theft. They considered the Nelvari property, not people. There would be demands, threats, possibly worse. 90 seconds later, the last Nelvari refugee crossed onto the Curiosity. Hajun ordered maximum speed away from the planet. The ship's engines whined in protest as they pushed beyond safe operating parameters. Karad ships are hailing us, reported communications. They're not being diplomatic. Ignore it, Hajun said, watching the tactical display as the interceptors fell behind. They'd make it to the jump point before the Karad could catch them. After that, a small Nelvari child approached him, looking up with eyes that seemed to contain galaxies. It reached out one delicate hand and touched Hajun's uniform insignia. Your people risk war to save mine, the translator conveyed. Why? Hajun looked around at his crew, some resolute, others clearly terrified, then back at the child. Because staying silent would cost us something we can't afford to lose, he said simply. As the stars stretched into lines of light around them and the ship jumped toward Earth, Hajun knew there was no going back. Humanity had just announced itself to the stars not as observers, but as participants. Whatever came next, they would face it standing up. The landing bay of Earth's orbital station Harmony buzzed with nervous energy as medical teams rushed to assist the Nelvari refugees. Hajun stood at the bottom of the Curiosity's ramp, watching as the silvery beings blinked under the bright lights, many seeing humans for the first time. A small Nelvari child clung to his leg, unwilling to join. The others just yet. They're scared, said Sunmi, now standing beside him. I don't blame them. Before Hajun could respond, a squad of security officers marched through the bay doors, led by a stern-faced Admiral Park. The Admiral's uniform was perfectly pressed, his face a mask of controlled fury. Lieutenant Commander Hajun, Park said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet bay. You are relieved of command, effective immediately. You and your senior officers will be placed under house arrest pending investigation for violation of the non-interference treaty. Hajun had expected this. With respect, Admiral, I accept full responsibility. My crew followed my orders. Your crew, Park snapped, helped you potentially start a war. He gestured at the Nelvari. Do you have any idea what you've done? The Karad ambassador is demanding an emergency meeting of the Security Council. They're calling this an act of piracy. Security officers moved forward to escort Hajun away. The Nelvari child tightened its grip on his leg, letting out a musical sound of distress. An older Nelvari, perhaps their parent, hurried forward, and gently pried the child away, bowing deeply to Hajun before retreating. What will happen to them? Hajun asked. Admiral Park's expression didn't soften. That's not your concern anymore. 3 days later, Hajun sat in a small apartment that served as his detention quarters, watching the news unfold on the wall screen. Someone, likely Sunmi or another crew member, had leaked footage of the Nelvari executions to the public networks. The video had gone viral across Earth and all colonial settlements. Protests had erupted outside government buildings. Humanity must stand for something, read one popular sign. Others simply asked, "Wait, what makes us human?" The door chimed, then slid open to reveal Junho, his old academy friend now working in intelligence. You look terrible, Junho said by way of greeting, dropping into a chair across from Hajun. House arrest agrees with me, Hajun replied dryly. What's happening out there? The official channels are filtering everything. Junho leaned forward. It's chaos. The Karad ambassador gave a speech yesterday demanding the return of all Nelvari assets within 48 hours. Called them runaway property. You should have seen the faces in that room. And? The Security Council is split. Half want to hand them over to prevent conflict, half are saying we have a moral obligation. Junho paused. But there's something else. One of the Nelvari asked to address the council. An elder named Risu. They allowed it this morning. Junho pulled out a small device and projected a recording onto the wall. A tall, dignified Nelvari stood before Earth's leaders, skin shimmering with subtle patterns that seemed to match their emotional state. We thank those who showed courage when others would not. Risu began, the translator conveying their musical language. What you witnessed on that surveillance footage is only a fraction of the truth. The Karad do not seek merely to enslave. They harvest worlds until nothing remains. The Nelvari described how 3 other species had already been systematically wiped out after resisting Karad control. Their civilizations erased, their art and knowledge destroyed, their planet stripped of resources. The Karad do not want you to know this, Risu continued. They isolate each species, tell them they are alone. But you, humans, you have done what no others dared. You have broken their most important tool. Silence. The recording ended. Hajun sat back, stunned. It gets worse, Junho said quietly. Intelligence suggests the Karad were planning to move against one of our outer colonies next year. They've been testing our defenses for months. A knock at the door interrupted them. A security officer entered, looking uncomfortable. Lieutenant Commander Hajun, your presence is requested at the Security Council. Immediately. The council chamber hummed with tension when Hajun entered. On one side sat Earth's highest officials, on the other the Karad ambassador, a hulking figure with red-tinged armor and eyes that seemed to burn with contempt. This is the thief, the Karad ambassador said, pointing at Hajun. The one who stole our property and violated sovereign Karad territory. Council President Min raised a hand for silence. Lieutenant Commander, you've been brought here because the Karad have made a specific request. They want you handed over, along with the Nelvari. A murmur ran through the chamber. Hajun kept his expression neutral, though his heart pounded. Furthermore, the Karad ambassador continued, to demonstrate the consequences of interference, we have conducted a limited military operation against one of your outposts. The room erupted. President Min shouted for order as a side screen activated showing footage of Europa Colony, a small research settlement of 4,000 people, or rather, what remained of it. The ice surface was cratered, habitat domes shattered, and exposed to vacuum. This is what defiance costs, the Karad said coldly. Return what is ours, or the next demonstration will not be so limited. Hajun felt sick. Those people, scientists, families, dead because of his choice. An unexpected voice broke the horrified silence. Risu had entered the chamber, flanked by other Nelvari elders. If you return us, we die, Risu said simply. If you resist, the Karad say you die. This is how they have always worked, making each choice seem impossible until surrender feels like wisdom. The Nelvari approached Hajun, placing a silvery hand on his shoulder. This human saw through that lie. He knew that to act was to risk war, but to stay silent was to lose something more precious. The council chamber fell silent. President Min looked from the Karad ambassador to the Nelvari, then finally to Hajun. Lieutenant Commander, she said quietly, do you stand by your actions? Hajun thought of the families on Europa, of the Nelvari child who had clung to his leg, of all the species who had already been erased. I do, he said firmly, and I would do it again. The Karad ambassador rose, towering over everyone. Then you have made your choice. Prepare your worlds for what comes next. He turned to leave, but President Min's voice stopped him. Ambassador, she called, her voice steady. Please convey to your government that Earth formally rejects your demands. The Nelvari are under our protection now, and... She looked around, the chamber seeming to find resolve. We will be investigating the massacre on Europa as an act of war. As the Karad stormed out, Hajun realized humanity had just crossed a line from which there was no return. For better or worse, they had chosen to stand for something. The cost would be high, but in the faces around him, human and Nelvari alike, he saw a determination that had not been there before. The silence had finally been broken. The underground, bunker 20 miles beneath Seoul, had been constructed during the resource wars as a final command center. Its gray walls never saw sunlight, but today they reflected the glow of dozens of holographic displays showing fleet movements across the solar system. Hajun hadn't expected to be here, not as a recently court-martialed officer, yet here, he stood, watching humanity prepare for a war they could not win. The Karad have moved 3 battle groups into the Tau Ceti corridor, said Admiral Kwan, pointing to red markers on the strategic display. They're establishing a blockade around our outer colonies. President Min nodded grimly. In the 2 weeks since Earth had rejected the Karad ultimatum, the government had shifted from diplomatic outrage to grim acceptance. Europa's destruction had been just the beginning. 2 cargo vessels had vanished near Neptune, and long-range scans showed Karad warships assembling at the edge of the solar system. "What about evacuation efforts?" asked Defense Minister Yu. "Proceeding, but slowly," Admiral Kwan replied. "We don't have enough ships to move everyone from the outer colonies. Mars is preparing refugee centers, but the unspoken truth hung in the air. Earth simply didn't have the firepower to match the Karad dominion. Military analysts estimated their ships outnumbered humanity's 4-to-1, with technology at least a generation more advanced." He-Jun cleared his throat. All eyes turned to him. "Permission to speak freely?" President Min gave a tired nod. "At this point, Commander, I think we're beyond standing on ceremony." "We need to stop thinking conventionally," He-Jun said, stepping toward the central display. "The Karad expect us to concentrate our forces around Earth and Mars, to fight a defensive war until we surrender or are overwhelmed." "And your alternative is?" asked Admiral Kwan skeptically. "Hit them where they don't expect it." "The Nelvari have provided details on Karad supply chains, communication relays, and most importantly," he highlighted a distant star system, the central processing facility where they take captured species. Minister Yu shook her head. "Even if we could reach it, we don't have the firepower to take on such a target." "Not alone, no," came a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. Sunmi stood there, but she wasn't alone. Behind her was a delegation of beings none of them had ever seen before. Tall crystalline figures with light pulsing beneath translucent skin. "May I present?" Sunmi said, her voice tight with excitement. "Representatives of the Lith Confederation." The tallest of the crystalline beings stepped forward and bowed. "We have observed your stand against the Karad with great interest," the translator conveyed. "For too long, many civilizations have remained neutral out of fear. We didn't know there were other advanced species in this sector," President Min said, recovering from her shock. "The Karad work hard to keep their victims isolated," the Lith representative explained, "to make each world believe it stands alone. But your broadcast of the Nelvari executions reached farther than you know." A second figure stepped forward, this one with sleek, almost feline features and copper-toned skin. "The Tarai Collective also extends its support," the new arrival said. "We have suffered Karad raids for generations, but believed ourselves too weak to resist." He-Jun exchanged stunned glances with Admiral Kwan. In the space of minutes, humanity had gone from fighting alone to discovering potential allies. "How many others are there?" President Min asked carefully. 7 spacefaring civilizations have agreed to form an alliance, the Lith representative said. "Separately, we could not hope to stand against the Dominion. Together, perhaps we can." Dawn broke over the Hong Kong spaceport as He-Jun watched workers swarming over the Curiosity. His former research vessel was being retrofitted with weapons, systems salvaged from 3 different species technologies. Similar scenes were playing out in shipyards across Earth and Mars as the hastily formed alliance pooled resources and knowledge. "It looks strange," Sunmi said, joining him on the observation deck, "like someone grafted pieces of different puzzles together." He-Jun nodded. "That's basically what we're doing. The Lith shields, Tarai targeting systems, human power cores, none of it was designed to work together." "But it does work," she reminded him. "The test flights proved it." In the 3 days since the alliance had been formalized, an astonishing exchange of technology had begun. Species that had hidden from the Karad for generations now worked openly alongside humans, each contributing what they could to the resistance effort. "Commander He-Jun," called a voice behind them. They turned to see Risu approaching, accompanied by several younger Nelvari. "Just He-Jun now," he corrected gently. "I'm still technically discharged." Risu made the Nelvari gesture of respect, hands crossed at the wrists, palms outward. "The Alliance Council has approved our proposal. We wish to serve on your ships." He-Jun frowned. "The Nelvari aren't a warrior species. Your people have Already suffered enough. We are not warriors, Risu agreed. But we lived under Karad control for years. We know their systems, their codes, their patterns. No one understands their weaknesses better than former slaves. Before Hajun could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the spaceport. His communication implant buzzed urgently. "This is Hajun," he answered, pressing his finger to his ear. Admiral Kwan's voice came through, tense but controlled. "Get to the command center immediately. The Karad have bypassed our outer defenses. They've launched an attack on the Mars colonies." The command center was in controlled chaos when they arrived. Holographic displays showed a Karad battle group engaging the limited Mars defense fleet. Already 3 human ships appeared as drifting debris. "They're targeting civilian areas," reported an officer, voice shaking. "Settlement domes in Arcadia Planitia are reporting breaches." President Min turned to the assembled Alliance representatives. "This is happening faster than we anticipated. Our forces aren't ready." The Lith representative stepped forward. "Our ships are already moving to assist, but they won't arrive for ye. 17 of your hours. Too late," Admiral Kwan said grimly. "Mars will fall by then." Hajun studied the tactical display, mind racing. "What about the prototype? Is it operational?" A uncomfortable silence fell. The prototype was a Curiosity-class research vessel that had been completely rebuilt with hybrid technology, the first true Alliance warship. "Theoretically," Admiral Kwan said cautiously. "But we haven't completed weapons testing." "It doesn't need weapons," Hajun said, a plan forming. "It needs speed, and a skeleton crew willing to take a risk." Sunmi immediately stepped forward. "I volunteer." One by one, others joined. Humans, Nelvari, even a Tarai engineer. Admiral Kwan looked like he wanted to object but instead nodded reluctantly. "What exactly are you planning?" President Min asked. Hajun pointed to the display. "The Karad believe they're attacking a defenseless colony. They don't know about the Alliance yet. We'll use the prototype to deploy this." He held up a small data crystal that Risu had given him. A Nelvari countermeasure that temporarily disables Karad targeting systems. It won't destroy their ships, but it will buy time for evacuations and for Alliance reinforcements to arrive. It was a desperate plan, formed in seconds. Yet as Hajun looked around at the diverse faces watching him, human and alien alike, he saw something he hadn't expected. Hope. "You realize," Admiral Kwan said quietly, "if you do this, there's no going back. This will be the first official act of an interspecies alliance against the Karad. They will respond with everything they have." Hajun glanced at Risu, then at Sunmi. "Good," he said firmly. "It's time they learned they're not fighting just one world anymore." Within the hour, the prototype ship, hastily christened Unity, lifted off with its volunteer crew, racing to reach Mars before it was too late. Behind them, Earth buzzed with activity as the last pieces of a coalition forged in crisis fell into place. Species that had never met before now worked side by side, united by a common understanding. To remain silent was no longer an option. The Unity drifted silently through the asteroid field, running on minimal power. From the bridge, Hajun watched the massive Karad battle station grow larger in the view screen. Its surface bristled with weapon emplacements, and occasional flashes of light marked ships coming and going from its hangars. This was the heart of the Karad slave processing system, a facility larger than Earth's moon where captured species were sorted, processed, and distributed throughout the Dominion. "Nervous?" Sunmi asked quietly, adjusting the stealth systems. They'd adapted from Tarai technology. "Terrified," Hajun admitted. No point lying to his friend. "But we don't have a choice." 3 months had passed since the formation of the Alliance. 3 months of bloody conflict across a dozen star systems. The initial battle for Mars had been won, barely, when the Unity's countermeasures had disabled the Karad targeting systems long enough for the civilians to evacuate. But the victories since then had been rare and costly. Last week, the Karad had obliterated the Lith homeworld. 2 billion crystalline beings, gone in a day of orbital bombardment. The Alliance fleet was now engaged in a desperate holding action near Proxima Centauri, drawing the main Karad forces away from Earth and their allies' remaining worlds, which gave Hajun's small team their one chance to strike at the Karad where it would truly hurt. Risu entered the bridge, moving with the strange flowing grace of the Nelvari. "We are ready. The modified probes have been prepared." Hajun nodded. Their mission wasn't to destroy the station. That would be impossible with a single ship. Instead, they carried something potentially more powerful: truth. "All teams to positions," Hajun ordered. "Prepare for approach." The Unity crept forward, using the asteroid field as cover. Inside the ship, 12 specially selected crew members, representing 4 Alliance species, made final preparations. Their plan relied on perfect timing and more than a little luck. "Proximity alert," reported Jiho, the young tactical officer. "Patrol craft at Sector 7. Everyone froze. A Karad patrol ship drifted past less than a kilometer away. Its sensors swept the asteroid field methodically. "Hold position," Hajun whispered, as if the Karad might hear him through the vacuum of space. For tense minutes, no one moved. The patrol continued its scan, then adjusted course away from them. Collective sighs of relief filled the bridge. "They've changed their patrol patterns," Risu observed. "Security has been increased since I was last here." "Can we still do this?" Sunmi asked. Hajun studied the tactical display. "We'll have to modify our approach. Use the maintenance shaft on the north quadrant instead of the main processing dock." Jiho looked up from his console, face pale. "That's directly beneath their primary defense battery. If they detect us, then we don't let them detect us," Hajun said simply. "Adjust course. Let's finish what we started." The maintenance shaft was barely large enough for their shuttle. Hajun, Risu, Sunmi, and Jiho squeezed into environment suits as they prepared to board. The rest of the crew would remain on the Unity, ready for a quick extraction, or to continue the mission if the first team failed. "Remember," Hajun told them, "we need just 10 minutes to upload the data package and activate the broadcast system. 10 minutes to show every Karad citizen what their leaders have been doing in their name." The intelligence was devastating. Years of Nelvari resistance fighters documenting atrocities combined with Alliance data on genocide across multiple worlds. But more importantly, they carried proof that the Karad leadership had been lying to their own people. The public had been told they were protecting primitive species, helping them develop. They had no idea about the enslavement, the executions, the stripped worlds left lifeless. "What if they don't care?" Jiho asked suddenly. "What if they see it and agree with what's being done?" Hajun had asked himself the same question many times. "Every civilization has those who will turn away from uncomfortable truths," he said quietly. But Risu's intelligence suggests many ordinary Karad would oppose these actions if they knew. "We have to believe that's true." The shuttle detached silently, thrusters giving the gentlest push toward the station. Hajun felt sweat trickling down his back despite the suit's cooling system. Everything, the Alliance, Earth, countless lives, hinged on this moment. As they approached the docking port, red warning lights suddenly flashed inside their shuttle. "We've been scanned," Sunmi hissed. "They know we're here." Alarms blared. From the station, the maintenance port began to close. "Full thrust," Hajun ordered. "We have to get inside before it seals." The shuttle shot forward, scraping against the closing doors with a horrific screech of metal. For a moment, Hajun thought they'd make it. Then the doors jammed against their craft, leaving them half in, half out of the station. "We're trapped," Jiho said, voice shaking. "They'll have security teams here in minutes." Hajun's mind raced. "Suit up. We go on foot from here. Sunmi, set the shuttle to overload. We'll use it as a distraction." They scrambled into the station through the damaged airlock, the alarms growing louder without the shuttle's hull to muffle them. Risu moved with surprising speed, leading them through service corridors that hadn't changed since their captivity. "This way," the Nelvari whispered. "The central processing hub is 3 levels down." As they rounded a corner, they froze. Before them stretched an enormous holding area, thousands of transparent cells, each containing captured beings. Some were species Hajun recognized from the Alliance. Others he had never seen before. But most chilling were the humans. Colonists who had been captured in the early raids now awaiting processing. There are so many, Sunmi breathed, horror evident even through her helmet comm. Which is why we cannot fail, Risu said firmly. Distant explosion rocked the station, their shuttle's overload creating the distraction they needed. They pressed on, racing through the labyrinthine corridors as Karad security forces rushed toward the explosion. Finally, they reached the central broadcast hub, a circular room filled with communication equipment. Ji-ho immediately went to work, fingers flying over the alien interface as Risu guided him. How long? Ha-jun asked, watching the corridor. 7 minutes to bypass security, Ji-ho replied. 3 more to initiate the broadcast. Work fast, Sunmi said, checking her scanner. We've got movement heading this way. Ha-jun took position by the door. I'll hold them off. Get that broadcast running. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly. Ha-jun could hear heavy footsteps approaching, a Karad security team closing in. His hand tightened on his weapon. Almost there, Ji-ho called. Just need to. The door exploded inward. Karad soldiers poured through, weapons raised. Ha-jun fired, diving for cover as energy blasts scorched the wall behind him. Sunmi joined the fight, providing covering. Fire as Risu and Ji-ho worked frantically on the console. We need more time, Ji-ho shouted over the weapons fire. A Karad blast caught Sunmi in the shoulder, spinning her around. Ha-jun pulled her to safety, but more soldiers were pouring in. They were out of time. Ji-ho looked at the console, then at his friends. In that moment, Ha-jun saw something change in the young officer's eyes, a decision made. Get to the extraction point, Ji-ho said calmly. I'll finish this. We're not leaving you, Ha-jun insisted. Ji-ho smiled sadly. Someone has to stay to make sure the broadcast continues. They can't stop it once it starts. But they'll try to cut it short. He looked at Risu. How many more could be saved if everyone sees the full truth? Before Ha-jun could argue further, another explosion rocked the room. The ceiling partially collapsed, temporarily blocking the Karad advance. Go, Ji-ho shouted, turning back to the console. I've got this. Tell my family. Tell them I finally found something worth fighting for. With a heavy heart, Ha-jun helped Sunmi to her feet. Risu led them toward a maintenance shaft that would take them to the extraction point. As they crawled away, Ha-jun glanced back to see Ji-ho standing tall at the console, fingers still working as the broadcast began and the Karad forces regrouped for another assault. The truth was finally breaking free. The cost had been high, perhaps too high, but as they raced through the station toward the waiting Unity, screens throughout the facility flickered to life, beginning to show the Karad people what had been done in their name. The rain fell, steadily over the memorial garden, droplets sliding down the smooth black stone that bore Ji-ho's name among thousands of others. Ha-jun stood silently, uniform soaked through, remembering the young officer whose sacrifice had changed everything 6 months ago. I thought I'd find you here, Sunmi said quietly, approaching with an umbrella. She held it over both of them, though Ha-jun was already drenched. Her left arm was still in a brace, like the injury from the station never fully healed. The ceremony starts in an hour, she reminded him gently. Ha-jun nodded but didn't move. I keep thinking about what he said at the end, that he'd found something worth fighting for. His fingers traced the etched characters of Ji-ho's name. Did we? Was it worth it? Sunmi didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked across the memorial garden where humans stood alongside Nelvari, Lith, Tarai, and a dozen other species, all paying respects to their fallen. In the distance, the rebuilt skyline of Seoul glittered under clearing skies. Look around, she finally said. I think you know the answer. The Grand Assembly Hall had once been Earth's United Nations headquarters. Now it hosted representatives from 27 spacefaring civilizations, the expanded alliance that had emerged from the war. Ha-jun felt distinctly uncomfortable in his formal admiral's uniform as he was escorted to the front row. President Min nodded to him as he took his seat. On the stage, final preparations were underway for the signing ceremony that would formally end hostilities with the Karad Dominion, or what remained of it. Nervous? President Min asked. Just ready for it to be over, Ha-jun admitted. The broadcast from the processing station had been more effective than anyone could have imagined. Within days, protests had erupted across Karad territories. Ordinary citizens, confronted with the reality of what their government had been doing, took to the streets. When military commanders ordered troops to fire on protesters, something unprecedented happened. Many refused. The Karad civil war that followed was brief but devastating. As the Dominion fractured from within, the Alliance pressed its advantage, liberating slave worlds one by one. Karad ships began surrendering, their crews often joining the resistance against their former masters. Now, 6 months later, a delegation from the new Karad provisional government had arrived to sign the peace accords. A hush fell over the assembly as they entered, 7 Karad in simple gray robes rather than the traditional military armor. They moved with visible discomfort under the watchful eyes of people they had tried to conquer. The lead delegate stepped forward to the central podium. Ha-Jun recognized her from intelligence briefings. Do-Yun, formerly a mid-level administrator, who had helped spread Jiho's broadcast throughout the Karad communication networks. "I stand before you," she began, her voice carrying through the silent hall, "not to ask forgiveness which we do not deserve, but to acknowledge truth, which we cannot escape." She looked around the assembly. "For generations, we were taught that our dominion over others was natural and right, that lesser species needed our guidance, our control." Do-Yun's gaze found Ha-Jun in the front row. "We were taught that strength meant domination. We were wrong." Later, at the reception, Ha-Jun stood awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, uncomfortable with the attention. Too many people wanted to shake his hand, to thank the man whose decision to save a single ship of refugees had ultimately brought down an empire. He'd already escaped 3 different journalists and a documentary filmmaker. "You look like you'd rather face another Karad battle fleet than stay at this party," observed a voice behind him. Ha-Jun turned to find Do-Yun, the Yarad delegate, watching him with what might have been amusement. Up close, he could see the subtle ridges on her face that marked all Karad, though without the traditional war paint they seemed less threatening. "I'm not good at celebrations," he admitted, unsure how to interact with someone he'd spent years fighting against. "Neither are my people," she said. "We're still learning there are things worth celebrating beyond conquest." An uncomfortable silence fell between them, representative of the awkward peace being forged between their peoples. "I knew someone who worked at that processing station," Do-Yun finally said. "When the broadcast began, he called me, confused, angry. He said it had to be Alliance propaganda." She looked down at her hands. By the end of the transmission, he was weeping. He helped open the holding cells before security forces arrived. Ha-Jun thought of Jiho, standing at that console as the Karad closed in. The officer who stayed behind to complete the broadcast, his name was Jiho. Do-Yun nodded solemnly. "Then the Karad people owe Jiho a debt we can never repay." He believed there were good people among the Karad who would choose differently if they knew the truth, Ha-Jun said. "I wasn't always convinced he was right. And now," Ha-Jun considered this, "now I think the universe is more complicated than we want it to be. There are no perfect heroes or absolute villains, just people making choices for better or worse." Do-Yun smiled slightly. "You risked everything when silence was safer," she said. "You taught us that true strength isn't measured by domination." From across the room, Ha-Jun spotted Risu surrounded by a group of children, human, Nelvari, and even a few young Karad, all listening intently as the elder shared a story. Despite everything, the younger generations were already finding common ground. "What happens now?" Ha-Jun asked, genuinely curious. The war had consumed his life for so long that peace seemed almost unimaginable. "Now comes the harder part," Do-Yun said. "Rebuilding. Making amends where we can. My people have a long path ahead. Many still resist acknowledging what we did." President Min approached, accompanied by Alliance representatives. "Admiral Ha-Jun," she called, "they're ready for the final treaty signing. Your presence is requested." Ha-Jun nodded, then turned back to Do-Yun. "For what it's worth, I believe people can change. Not easily, not quickly, but they can." "So do I," the Karad delegate replied. Otherwise, I would not be here. 3 weeks later, Ha-Jun stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Unity, watching as thousands of released prisoners were welcomed home to a Nelvari colony world. Former slaves embraced family members they'd thought dead. Children born in captivity touched their ancestral soil for the first time. "It's a good day," Risu said, joining him at the viewport. "One of many to come, I hope," Ha-Jun replied. The Alliance fleet hung in orbit, ships of different designs from civilizations that had never cooperated before. Already, mixed crews were becoming common as species shared knowledge, culture, and technology. What had begun as a desperate wartime, necessity was evolving into something new. "The Council has approved establishing a permanent headquarters on neutral territory," Risu informed him. "They want you to lead the security forces." Ha-Jun raised an eyebrow. "Me? I started this war by disobeying orders." "Precisely why they want you," the Nelvari said with a rippling laugh. "Someone who will listen to conscience over convenience." Below them, the reunions continued. Ha-Jun watched a Nelvari child pointing excitedly at the ships overhead, perhaps dreaming of traveling among the stars someday. Not as cargo or slaves, but as equals. "When I made the decision to rescue your ship," Ha-Jun said quietly, "I never imagined where it would lead." "The greatest journeys often begin with the smallest steps," Risu replied. "One voice breaking the silence can awaken many others." Ha-Jun thought of all they had lost. Jiho, the billions dead on the Lith homeworld, countless others across dozens of systems. The cost had been unimaginably high. Yet watching the scenes of joy below, he couldn't regret the choice he'd made that day on the Curiosity's bridge. To act had indeed risked war. But to stay silent would have cost them their humanity, and denied countless beings across the galaxy their chance at freedom. The Unity's communications officer called over the intercom. "Admiral, incoming transmission from Earth. The remaining slave processing facilities have been secured. The last prisoners are being released." Ha-Jun exchanged a glance with Risu, both allowing themselves a moment of quiet satisfaction. There would be challenges ahead. Reconciliation was never easy, and old hatreds wouldn't disappear overnight. But something fundamental had changed. In the galaxy. "Send acknowledgement," Ha-Jun replied, "and set course for the rendezvous point. We have rebuilding to do." As the Unity turned toward its next destination, Ha-Jun remained at the viewport a moment longer. Somewhere out there, millions of beings were waking up to their first day of freedom, while millions more were confronting uncomfortable truths about their past. The silence had been broken, and in its place, something new had begun to grow. Fragile yet, but full of possibility. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a beginning worth fighting for.